Hi everyone, it's Alyssa, and this is the review I have definitely been waiting for the past year. So I should start by saying that I am an English teacher and I do teach Wuthering Heights, and Wuthering Heights is my favorite novel of all time. But with that said, I'm the kind of person who actually loves an adaptation, and I like when you make a story different than what it actually is supposed to be, as long as it makes sense to the themes and the ideas in the story. And I think that's the key thing with this kind of adaptation is what did it keep and what did it get rid of? So in this video, it's going to be hard not to spoil things, especially from the book specifically, because I cannot help but compare the two. So anytime I'm talking about the book, just know I am going to be spoiling it, but I'm not going to spoil, certain key things in the movie. I want to start with the marketing and how this movie actually connected to the marketing or didn't connect to the marketing. Then I want to give my review. Then I want to give a theater experience, because I have to say that this particular experience was one for the ages. I'll just say there was a teenage boy and his mom there, and some very interesting things happened as they were sitting right next to me. So starting with the marketing, I was furious when I saw this teaser trailer, and I even made a video about it, and I thought it was so absurd how far they were going into just like the naughtiness of the story, which is not actually in the story, yet the movie stays away from the cruelty. It's very odd. However, I want to say the marketing definitely didn't live up to what the movie actually was. To say I walked out of this movie thinking that this was relatively tame for what they were advertising it to be is an understatement. I literally looked at my husband and I was like, that was actually boring at times. And like when you're pushing that this is going to be like the sexiest movie ever, and it really wasn't. Even the MPAA agrees with me, because I looked it up and it literally says it has some sexuality, like some, not like the way the advertising and the way the actors were talking about it. And it was actually really tame for all of the dog collars and everything they were talking about. It was kind of nothing. And what happens as a result of that nothing is you need other parts of the story and other parts of the characters to actually fill it in to make this a very full story. And that's exactly what this movie didn't do. Now, I walked into it and I knew there was going to be no Hindley, there's no Hareton, there's no second generation of children, which is the craziest thing in my head. And I will say, a lot of adaptations leave these characters out, but they don't leave out, say, like Hindley as a character. And I did think it was very weird that you basically took Hindley and you took Mr. Earnshaw and you made them an amalgamation of the same character. I don't know why you wouldn't keep the brother. I'm not saying it didn't work or that actor wasn't good, but I just didn't necessarily understand why. And the reason I'm saying this is because there's so much nastiness, as in cruelty, in the book that you could have added into the movie to sort of fill out the movie and fill out that very, like dark romantic love story. And I say that because there are things that people are saying that I just fundamentally don't agree with. Number one, this movie wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen in my life, the way a lot of people will have you believe. It is a movie that made some decisions that I thought did not work at all. And it's a movie that actually made some decisions, mainly stylistically, that I did think worked and were interesting, and some stylistic choices that I didn't like. But to say that it's not connected to the book at all, I think is wrong, because you are dealing with the same characters. They do have behaviors that are some of the behaviors of the characters in the book. So it's not, I have seen adaptations that are so much more beyond what the book is. I thought the adaptation of Frankenstein was so incredibly different from the book, yet I liked the changes. So it's not that so much, and it's not that it doesn't stick to what the story is supposed to be, but the fact that it doesn't fill the story out and it only makes it about this kind of forbidden romance. Now, I do think Heathcliff and Cathy have a version of a love story in the novel. I don't, when people say that this is not a love story, it is. It's a very dark love story, and it's a very cruel love story, but there are absolutely people in their life who have very dark and cruel stories that they will feel like love. But what you're taking away is the entire revenge aspect of this story, which is a huge negative and a huge drawback for me. This movie has already made over $80 million globally in one weekend. I will not understand why you could not have taken the story and split it into essentially the two parts of the book. So make the movie that you made, although I would have made a lot of differences from what Emerald Fennell made in the story, and then make the second movie, which would essentially be the second generation and Heathcliff, and the just like how Heathcliff becomes so he's cruel in the first part of the story, but in a way there's like cruelty where you understand where it's coming from. And the second part of the story, the cruelty goes so like off the charts, and I would love to see it. And getting to sort of the casting, I actually think that is something that Jacob Elordi could do. I think he could be the kind of actor who'd be able to go so dark, and it's like you see it in the tiniest bits in the movie, but you don't see it throughout the movie. It's like there are hints and there are glimmers of this darkness, but it's so much more about his obsession and his almost like loyalty and his dog-likeness to Catherine that you don't get to see the really nasty side of Heathcliff, which is what makes the story so fun. And if you had the first part of the story, well, then you would have Hindley, and then you would have Hareton, and there would be so many like nasty, gross parts in that story that would be so well adapted into the movie. And there is one part in particular, and it's a scene in the book that is just one of my like scenes that I've never seen made into a movie because it would be really odd to translate it. But I thought if anyone could handle this kind of darkness, it would be Emerald Fennell. And it's the scene in the book where Hindley is just like a rip-roaring drunk, and he comes home and he sees Hareton, and he's like screaming at Hareton to kiss him, and Nellie has put Hareton in like the kitchen cabinet because she's so worried for his safety and how violent Hindley is. And then Hindley takes him and grabs him and takes him to the top of the steps, and then accidentally like drops his son, and Heathcliff catches him. And it's this moment where Heathcliff is like, he could have gotten all of his revenge right there, and yet like within his heart, his like fundamental being is that of a good person. Like to see a scene like that on film would have been so exciting and so dark and so nasty, which is what the book is. And when Emerald Fennell says this is an unfilmable book, I fundamentally do not agree with that. I do think this is a book that you could film, but I do think it needs to be put into two parts. And I think if you had essentially like a 4-hour runtime to tell this story, you would be telling the complete story, but you could do it in a really stylized way. Like, what did I think worked? Well, I actually didn't dislike the way they integrated the movie and the Charlie XCX music into the story. I did actually feel like it felt in terms of the emotions, and I was surprised by how much kind of traditional music was in the movie as well, and a lot of like chanting and singing. And I did like the connections to, you know, old Hollywood, and the fact that there were so many set design choices that would be like a Gone with the Wind, and the use of the reds and everything. And it was incredibly plasticky feeling, and it was very fake, but I think that was the whole point of it. But I don't know how I feel about the actual Wuthering Heights house production design, because it did look like you were looking at something in Disney World. Like the rocks weren't even rocks, they were plastic. And you could tell that they were like those, like the Disney constructed plastic rocks. And I guess it is a choice to show like how constructed of a storybook this is. And I didn't hate it, though I will say I liked the production design when it came to Thrushcross Grange more than how I kind of liked how they were interpreting Wuthering Heights. But I did think the movie gave that sort of claustrophobic feeling of you're like stuck in these two places and there really is no way out. And even when Catherine is able to get out of Wuthering Heights and go to Thrushcross Grange, and everything feels like you're just constricted and everything is a prison, and that is the way I felt reading the story. So to say that there wasn't parts of this story that were not taken from the book, I don't feel like that's really fair to say. Though, to get to the casting, and I've been kind of holding off on that, and I didn't give a plot summary because I feel like you probably know the plot at this point if you've seen the movie or seen the trailers or get the idea of it, that it is very much to do with like the unrequited love and a forbidden romance. But the thing is, it's not like because of the casting. And so there's a lot to say about Jacob Elordi being cast, but I will say, does he have some of the broodingness? He does have it. Is his age more in the vicinity of where he should be? Yeah, a bit more. Does he look like how the character should look? No, he doesn't at all. But also, when I looked at every single adaptation of this book, the only time I've ever seen an accurate depiction is with Andrea Arnold and her version, which was quite good, but also left out a lot of key things from the novel. So I've already talked about Jacob Elordi and that casting, and how that casting in terms of just like the physical does not work at all. But what actually hit me watching the movie was how much Margot Robbie didn't fit the character, because they still keep that sort of like brattiness of Catherine and the childlike voice of Catherine, yet I am literally looking at a fully grown adult woman the entire movie. So like, I actually had a hard time just accepting her as Catherine. And I'll get past like, oh, the blonde hair and it should be brunette and she should feel... She actually kind of acted the characters kind of like the book, though I feel like she never quite hit like the grittiness and the savagery of that character. She was more just like a little brat. And forget the way that Isabella is portrayed in this movie. I felt actually so bad for the way they were portraying Isabella. But like Margot Robbie just didn't fit. And when we talk about like, you have to talk about the chemistry between these two people, because if your entire sales pitch is on the chemistry between these two characters, I thought it was kind of tame, actually. And in some ways, and this is weird, I felt it more from him than I felt it from her. To me, at times, and I like her as an actress, but she's very technical and she's very calculating, and she kind of knows exactly what the character is supposed to be, and so she gives you that. I don't think she's so good at like the messiness, and she doesn't hit the messiness of Catherine for me. I never feel the authenticity from her, and at the end of the day, that was the thing that didn't work the most. I also think you kind of didn't use Hong Chow enough. Like her as Nellie and the way that they presented her character in the story as Nellie, and her coming from like almost like not royalty, but I think it was like she was, half from a duke, or she came from half upper class, but because she was a bastard, then just like Heathcliff. So you were making these weird parallels to Heathcliff, to other characters, but then you never actually did anything with it. And I felt like that was one of the worst, that's one of my biggest criticisms of the movie, because it happens several times where you set it up to be one thing and make an actual statement that would be interesting. Like make a parallel between Nellie and Heathcliff and give that so that, which would be a huge difference from the actual novel, the way that they are, paired up in the novel, but like make them sort of foil characters to each other, like how in the book Heathcliff is sort of like a foil to Edgar. I didn't feel like certain characters were out there enough. Like Edgar, it could be such an interesting character, and in this you only see him in a couple of scenes, and he's really just, he's in the story to be something that is the opposite of Heathcliff. Yet you never really understand who he is as a character, and you never see scenes with him and really Heathcliff together. There are so many scenes where Heathcliff is like violently upset and angry at Edgar, and Edgar almost has like his own brattiness to him because he is so rich. So you're not taking advantage of all of these opportunities to actually have a movie that says something about the world, and that was what was the most frustrating. So there was Nellie, who I didn't feel was utilized enough, and they kind of tie her in at the end of the story. I won't say how, but in a way that I didn't particularly like, but I felt like you weren't utilizing an actress who is just like a phenomenal actress. I thought it was really odd that and not really a spoiler, that Edgar and Isabella are not brother and sister in this, that like Isabella is Edgar's ward. And it was like, but they never got married because they were like brother and sister. And I was like, well, maybe that's paralleling the fact that Heathcliff and Catherine, well, they also are kind of like brother and sister, but they are desperately in love with each other. But that parallel never really happens. And also in the beginning of the movie, which there was so much conversation about what that first scene was going to be, and it sounded so graphic and over the top. And then I saw it was absolutely nothing. It was nothing. But what was the problem is what happens in the very first scene of the movie, it never comes back around. I will just say there is something to do with a hanging. And then throughout the movie, they talk about like, oh, a hanging. And then like it just dips off and it never talks about it ever again. So it was just like, what are you doing? You're bringing up so many ideas and then it like never comes back around in the end. So all in all, when I think about this movie, the things that I thought were going to make me upset about the movie, like eliminating the character Hindley and not having a hair tin, and those actually didn't bother me with the choices she made and kind of adapting things in. It was the fact that the movie actually didn't go far enough, because what I do appreciate is that there is a surrealistic quality to the novel, and there are things that happen that are so like grand and over the top, and the whole sort of like ghostliness of the story is just completely out of the movie. Yet like it would have fit in to the fundamental look of the movie, because there's like fog machines for days in this movie, and the production design was just so some interesting moments in it. Yet the script was never quite trusted the audience to get everything, which was another thing I absolutely hated. Like the most minor of spoilers, but like when you see the new bedroom that Catherine has when she goes into Thrushcross Grange, and it's supposed to be, Edgar says it's like the color of your skin, and that's a freckle from your face. It's like, you didn't have to say it's a freckle from her face. Like I see the veins on, like on the wall. I get what this is. I felt like the movie was telling us so much of what to think and not letting the visuals do the talking. When you have strong visuals, let the visuals do the talking. Like we now, and here's where I could be wrong, we are smart enough to figure it out. And this is where I get to my movie experience. And, I sit down and a teenage boy sits next to me. I'm expecting probably he's with his girlfriend. Okay, no, he's with his mom. During the movie, The questions that were being asked, as in like, what is that? It was a pipe. The kid didn't know what a pipe was. His mom had to, at one point, take out a blanket and covered him in the blanket. He was not in any kind of like state where I would say the child was not mentally there. He was fully there. He's just like, Mom, can you give me I literally heard him say, Mom, can you get my blanket out for me and like put me in? Like I couldn't believe it. He had his phone out the entire time and it was blackened, so I couldn't see it. But like at the end of the movie, which if you know what happens to Catherine, she literally had to say, oh, look, this just happened to Kathy. And the mom was just as bad, because there were points where she was like, who is this guy, Edgar? I was like, wait, what? So there is a part of me that understands. It doesn't, I don't understand it, but I see why they're dumbing down movies. And I feel like this is very much a dumbed down version of the movie that has very pretty aesthetics. But what breaks my heart is that this movie could have been so much more if you trusted the audience, if you made a bigger story and actually showed more of the characters and like gave the characters more reason for who they are. Isabella is just infantilized in this story in such a way that I didn't find it interesting. Like it was supposed to be sort of like shocking when you see what happens to Isabella, which is of course the exact opposite of what happens in the book. But like, I didn't find it shocking. I just found it kind of like sad and depressing, which was kind of how I felt in so much of this movie. Like, why was I bored in a movie that was promising me anything but boredom, right? Like I might hate it. I was ready to be just like actively angry with the choices. And I found myself not really that angry, just more like bored and disappointed by things, which is a weird way to give a review. But that is where I am going to leave it. Is it the worst movie I've ever seen in the entirety of my life? No, it's not the worst movie. Am I disappointed and thought, wow, you could have actually made this like a surreal, beautiful movie that is about like the other side of like love and like this vengeance and this anger, where love can turn into a seed that like grows into hatred inside of you and just literally cannot stop growing. And the level of like manipulation that Heathcliff displays as a character is just, it's so juicy and it's made for a movie, yet like it's never really, the full meanness of Heathcliff has never really been shown. I would say the closest I ever felt to the true like vengeful cruelty within Heathcliff is Tom Hardy's performance in like a masterpiece theater version of Wuthering Heights, a version that I think actually is somewhat close to what the actual novel is at points. But of course, again, he is the absolute wrong casting from a physical perspective, but in terms of the like emotional things that he taps into and like the self-destruction that character has in that movie, and then like the cruelty to other people, but then underneath it you can see some semblance of a human being. I just felt like that movie plays the characters in a better way, though I will also say in that version Catherine's not nearly as bratty as she's supposed to be, and she's a bit more likable, which I don't like either. But that movie does portray Edgar in sort of less likable ways, and Isabella in the way that I actually thought about her in the book. So, you know, if you wanted something that I think is a little bit more in line with what the book kind of feels like, I would actually say that PBS Masterpiece Theater is somewhat close, and I do like the Andrea Arnold version of it too. So maybe check out those as well. I would love to hear what you all thought. And if you really hated it, let me know how much you hated it. If you liked parts of it, I would love to know. I'm gonna sit in this space where I'm like, I just feel disappointed and a bit bored. And that is not the reaction I thought I was gonna have. So if you are not subscribed to the channel, you could consider subscribing to get sort of my feelings. Especially I love when they do these book to movie adaptations. Please leave comments with what you thought about the film and the novel, and I will talk to you all soon. All right, bye.